Hey there, I'm the MadCatster. Am I glad to see you here? Well, the day has finally come when Ashley Gillard, the TikTok psychic, has to pay the piper and has to come to the realization that she is, in my opinion, a fraud, and that everything that she has said in regards to that Idaho student murder case is absolutely nonsense and fiction because the real killer has pleaded guilty to all counts. So there can be no question. You know me, I've got the deets and all the receipts. We're going to talk about it, so buckle up and let's go. So I'm here with Sybil the Enforcer, my old girl. She says, please like and subscribe. We would really appreciate it. Good girl, she's purring away. Ashley Gillard, the TikTok psychic, has put that poor University of Idaho professor through absolute hell with all of the accusations she made and with all of the sensational and ludicrous things that she had to say about the student deaths in Idaho from the University of Idaho. And we've talked about how she keeps clinging to the fact that her psychic investigation has told the real truth about what happened in this matter. And she even made me the subject of one of her videos where she absolutely called me all kinds of names and said all kinds of things that just were ridiculous. It was very juvenile of her. But anyways, one of the things that she said, I said how his car, the white Hyundai Elantra, was seen near the scene. And she went on and on about how she believed that the professor had access to a white Hyundai Elantra, even though the professor doesn't own a white Hyundai Elantra, and even though the professor and her husband were out of town at a wedding and it was very well documented. Well, I suppose I have access to a white Hyundai Elantra if I call Alamo Rent-A-Car. So does that make me a suspect? But all of the nonsense that she just absolutely fabricated and refused to go back on and apologize to the professor has led her now where she's been found to be liable by the court for defamation. And I'm sure the damages are going to be high. But I have a suspicion Ashley Gillard might be what we call judgment proof, meaning she's not going to be able to pay it. But, the professor at least will have cleared her name. And I think this new development goes a long way, too, in doing that. So I want to show you now some of the things that were said in court when he went to offer his plea. So one of the things that happens when you do a plea, because I actually used to do criminal defense when I first started out in law. I wasn't a public defender, but I worked for a law firm that had contracts with 2 states, and we basically took public defender cases, even though we were a private firm. So I've been through a lot of plea and sentencing, and in this instance, you do what's usually called a proffer, where the prosecution will give a summary of the evidence that would have presented at trial and why they believe they had a strong case for why the person is guilty. And then the person will go through a colloquy with the judge and admit their guilt. And they'll be asked if they admit their guilt because they're guilty, and they'll say yes, which is what happened in this case. And they usually don't go through like all the details. It's more of like a summary of the evidence. So this is what they said. It said, on Wednesday, the prosecution laid out a timeline of evidence that would have been presented at trial, which included small revelations about Koberger's path through the home where the events happened and the searches of his home and meticulously clean car. Early on the morning of the murders, prosecutors said Koberger parked his car, the white Elantra, behind the student's home and slipped inside through a sliding glass door to the kitchen at the back. Now, one thing that came up, which was DNA evidence, which Ashley Gillard, of course, says, oh, it was planted and, there was somebody else's DNA on the sheath. Well, we now have what I think is probably the explanation for that, and said the prosecution said, in a crucial mistake, Koberger left behind a knife sheath on which investigators found DNA they would later identify as Koberger's, the prosecutor said. Now, turns out that this knife apparently belonged to his father, which would explain why there would be another individual's DNA. And even though fathers and sons have similar DNA, they don't have identical DNA. And so that is, to me, is a very logical explanation for what happened. So he was charged with, not only was he charged with murder, but he was also charged with burglary. And on the burglary charge, it says Koberger will face a sentence of 10 years. But for the homicides, he faces a life sentence for each of the 4 counts, and they will run consecutively. Consecutively meaning you serve one, and when that ends, you serve the next, and when that ends, you serve the next. Well, a life sentence, he's never getting out of jail, basically. Sometimes they do concurrent sentences, which means you serve all your sentences basically at the same time so that you end up getting out of prison sooner than if you had done them consecutively. Well, like I said, in this case, he's not getting out of jail. He also waived his right to appeal the plea and sentence and to seek leniency and reconsideration of the sentence later. And one of the reasons he pleaded guilty was because it took the death penalty off of the table, which I'm sure the families weren't too happy about, but they, from what I understand, are fine with the plea, at least. Now the truth has come out, and they said that we will not represent that he intended to commit all of the murders that he did that night, but we know that that is what resulted, and that he then killed intentionally, willfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought. And those are basically the elements that were required to get first-degree murder. So Koberger, who's 30 years old, was a former PhD student of criminology, which explains why his car was thoroughly cleaned. And Ashley Gillard, it doesn't take a psychic to know that if he knows that much about criminal evidence, he would know exactly how not to leave much behind at the crime scene, although he, as we know, made a big mistake and did leave a vital piece of evidence. And he confirmed his guilt to State District Judge Stephen Hippler, and one of the victim's family members silently wept as other loved ones listened intently. And I just can't imagine the pain and horror that these families are going through. But it says, after the plea, prosecutor Bill Thompson delivered a lengthy outline of the evidence that would have been presented against Koberger at trial, including phone records that placed him near the victims' homes and an account of how he moved through the home on the night of the deaths. He also revealed that prosecutors still do not know whether he entered the home with the intent of killing all 4 students. Maybe not, but like they said earlier, that's unfortunately what happened. And it says, and this was apparently the first time he had actually spoken out in public. He had basically been quiet, and his lawyers had done all the talking up until this point. They also just recently revealed that now the judge's gag order about the police and others talking about the case has been lifted. So now the police seem like they're willing to give a little more insight and evidence. And this is another point that Ashley Gillard went off on me about. Was I said there was probably no new evidence that was going to come to light, and she vehemently insisted that yes, there is still new evidence coming out. And it's like, no, Ashley, they have all the evidence that they need, or that they are going to find probably, but they haven't revealed all of the evidence to the public for very good reason. They're saving a lot of that for trial. And so now I'm guessing they probably will be able to talk more about that evidence, but there's no new evidence, Ashley. There was never going to be any new evidence, and you're just clinging to fiction and fantasy, and you really ought to let it go, like Elsa said. And the judge went through and he said, are you pleading guilty because you're guilty? Koberger said yes. Did you, on November 13th, enter the residence in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder? The judge, yes, Koberger said again. And then Koberger's attorney said they're not going to speak out further until sentencing is finished. And he's due to be sentenced on the 23rd, so just in a couple of days. And I mean, it's not going to be a surprise what the sentence is, because that was part of the plea deal. So we know basically what he's going to be sentenced to. Also, with this lifting of the gag order, the police were asked if they were able to find a clear motive, and the police said that they could not answer. So I know that I think one of the students was his ex-girlfriend or somebody he had gone out with. So I don't know. I'm just stating what I think is the obvious. Is it must have been some kind of jealousy. Maybe he was spurned by that person and developed an obsession. I don't know. Hopefully there will be more that will come out that will tell us exactly what was going on. It said all documents in the case that have been sealed will remain sealed for now. Moscow police said they are preparing to release a large amount of information later on, and the chief said that they're committed to being transparent when they can be. And so one interesting thing too that came out now that the police have been allowed to talk is, I think it was the chief said he interviewed several people for an internship at the police department back in April 2022. But it said, the chief said, This particular position, it requires someone who can develop trust and rapport with my staff, and these are police officers, Jenkins said. In talking with Koberger, he didn't have a real conversational manner about him. He didn't come across as particularly personable, and I just didn't think he would be able to develop that trust and rapport. Months later, on December 20, 2022, Jenkins said he got chills when Koberger's name was brought up in the quadruple homicide investigation. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, Jenkins said. So, yeah, that is kind of creepy. But clearly this guy had a fascination with crime and criminology and must have factored into, I'm sure, like all criminals, he must have thought, I can get away with this. But, and I'm not laughing because I think it's funny. I'm laughing because I think it's funny that they think that they can get away with it. And of course, some people do. But, you know, the odds are pretty slim that you're actually going to get away with it and never get caught. So, and especially a case like this where there were several deaths and, you know, they had the ability to track this guy through cell phone towers, etc. It was just a matter of time, in my opinion. Even if they hadn't found that knife sheath, I'm sure eventually they would have settled on him. But anyways, the psychic investigation was a failure and it was completely wrong. Ashley Gillard is completely wrong. She has not been right at all in this matter. And yes, there were some coincidental things about who was where in the house and whether the dog was there or something. And, you know, things like that that just were obviously coincidental, because if it had been an accurate psychic investigation, more of the actual facts would have been put out by her. And instead, she just scapegoated this poor professor, put her through it. Hopefully now this is going to bring to a conclusion that, but, you know, I wouldn't bet any money on the fact that Ashley Gillard is just going to let this go now and say, yep, I was wrong. So you tell me what you think down below in the comments. Are you surprised that this is where we ended up? Let me know down below. Thank you so much to all of our Patreon patrons whose monthly support, of course, help me take care of my old kitties and young ones too, but especially the old ones like Sybil, who need more and more regular veterinary care. And Sybil's not sick, but she's, you know, she's at an age, she's over 17 now, where I know that eventually the time is going to come, but we try not to think about that. But thank you to our Patreon patrons. Thank you for that support. Our channel members, all of your monthly support really, really helps. Thank you to the people who are so generous and send things from the Amazon wish list, which I've actually updated because there's some things that we really don't need. We really need food, treats, and cat litter. But thank you guys for the generosity in your hearts. It really means a lot to us. And I've got another video coming up. If there are any cases or controversies that you would like me to cover, please leave it down in the comments, or you can email me at catstertips.gmail and I will respond to you. In the interim, take care of yourselves, love one another, and I will see you in the next one.
Pretty please. Subscribe, like, and hit the bell. I get a treat for every new sub. Thank you.